Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com. In this tutorial we're going to look at a couple of other attributes that can be useful on your beans to narrow down the selection for cases where you've got ambiguity in your auto wiring. So I've got this program here which is basically the same as the one from the last tutorial, except that I've got default auto wire by type switched on here, and I haven't got any I haven't named any auto wire candidates, and we've got ambiguity here because there are two beans of type file writer that could be wired into the file writer property of this of this logger class here. So this expects a file writer, and we've got two possible candidates. So if I run this now, it's not going to work. We'll get an error. The one way you can deal with that, apart from the techniques we've already seen, is if you look at your beans. Let's look at this squirrel bean, which is, if it wasn't for that, there would be no ambiguity. So one thing we can do is we can exclude beans from being even candidates for auto wiring. So if I set the auto wire -candidate attribute on this squirrel bean here, which is causing the problems, if I set that to false, then auto wiring won't even look at this bean when it's looking for beans to auto wire into other beans. If we look at the source now, we can see that we've got auto wire -candidate set to false on this. So we've now only got one file writer that will be considered for auto wiring, and if we run this, we've solved the problem. Let's take a look at another attribute. In fact, what I'll do is I'll duplicate this console writer here, and I'll call this one Panda. So now we've got two console writers. So again, because we're auto wiring by type, we've got ambiguity, and if I run that again, we've got a problem. So another thing we can do is, if we go to the beans, we can set one of these beans to be primary. So here there's a primary attribute, and if I go to my console writer bean, set primary to true, and save this and run it, again the ambiguity has gone away. So if we look at the source now, we see that out of all the beans that are being considered for auto wiring into this console writer property, and those are namely these two beans, which are both of type console writer, out of all of those, there's only one, and exactly one, that's primary, set to primary true. And if we have that, then it will wire in the primary bean and ignore the others. So that the only difference, as far as I understand anyway, between these two attributes, between auto wire -candidate and primary, is that if you set one to primary, the others will still be considered for auto wiring, and they might be auto wired elsewhere in your program into some other, injected into some other bean. It's just that if there's a choice of them and only one is primary, then you're fine, because it will only wire in the primary one. But we might have some situation where this bean might be auto wired by by name into some other bean or something, so it would still work. Whereas if you've excluded it from being even an auto wire candidate, then it's not going to be auto wired into anything, anywhere. So that is the difference. So two useful attributes, primary and auto wire -candidate. I think that's all for auto wiring now with XML, but we're going to look more at wiring beans using annotations, which is something that some people prefer. And I must admit, the first time I saw Spring was maybe, I'm not sure now, 2007, something like that for a guess. And at first I really hated it, because to me writing code has a kind of excitement to it, because you're making things happen using logic, whereas the way XML always seemed to me, and I know this is just me, this is just my mind, XML is all about configuration, and who wants to spend their day configuring things? So for that reason, I think it's great that it's also possible to use annotations in Spring, which removes nearly all of the XML, and we're going to be moving on to looking at that. So until next time, happy coding.